Now. So if you do feel uncomfortable about anything, please make sure that you do have the option to keep your camera off and just use the chat feature. We will be posting this in our Shape Maryland YouTube channel and sharing it on our website as well. So thank you so much for being here. And I would like to turn it over and thank One Love and FreeState Justice for supporting this and sharing information to make all of our students feel welcome in our health and physical education classrooms and building healthy relationships for all students. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie O'Leary from One Love, and she'll start us off. Thank you so much.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie. I use she, her pronouns. So excited to have you here today. For some reason, my computer has decided it wants to share my whole screen instead of just my PowerPoint. So Ezra might start sharing their screen in a second, but we can hang in there for now. All right. So I will turn it over to Ezra to introduce us to FreeState Justice, and then I'll tell you a little bit about One Love.
Hi, y'all. And I'll tell you, Jamie, I only see your PowerPoint as of right now, but let me know if any issues pop up, I can share for you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Ezra. I use they, them, and he, him pronouns, and I am the Director of Education and Outreach at FreeState Justice. Here you will see the three pillars of our work at FreeState. We're probably most known for our direct legal services. We have attorneys on staff and a pro bono attorney network where we help clients on a variety of issues that arise out of a person's sexual orientation and or gender identity. So for example, helping folks change their name and or gender marker, helping people with a variety of discrimination cases, whether that's K through 12, healthcare, employment, you name it. We are a nonprofit and call ourselves a legal advocacy organization. We're statewide, but predominantly based in Baltimore. That's where our office is when we're there. As you can tell, I am not in my office right now. I'm in the home office. And I do a lot of work in the advocacy and outreach and education and training portions, as you can probably imagine from my title. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. And so there you see a picture of my dog. That's the highlight here, of course. It used to be a picture of me, but had to get rid of it. And of course, he is currently being an angel right now, sleeping over here. That will probably not last, as my partner is going to get home momentarily. So if you see me disappear for a second, it's probably to usher him out and close the door behind me. But back to me and not my cute dog. I have been in LGBTQ plus advocacy for nearly a decade now. You see there some examples of the work that I've done in the past. I've been involved with the Baltimore City LGBTQ plus Commission, a member of the Law and Policy Committee. And I've also, if you know of the actress Angelica Ross or have watched Pose, her company is Trans Tech Social Enterprises. I have been a volunteer content developer for her and got to meet her a few years back. She's amazing. So yes, I'm just super happy to be here, and I'm happy that we have been working with One Love for coming up on a year soon, which is super excited. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Ezra. So One Love, for those of you who don't know, is an organization really dedicated to preventing relationship abuse and promoting healthy relationships. So we were founded in 2010 in honor of Yardley Love, a young woman from Baltimore who lost her life to relationship abuse. And so the work that we do now is really to help folks recognize the signs of abuse, know how to step in, and also know how to cultivate healthier relationships in their own lives. So I'm Jamie. Again, I use she, her pronouns. I'm an engagement coordinator out of our Baltimore office. And this is my relatively new dog as of a month ago, Napoleon. He also will probably work. He and Mango are yet to be friends, but I hope one day they will be. Just want to do a quick content warning. We are going to be talking about relationship abuse today, as well as some of the challenges that queer and trans folks face. That can be really hard to hear and hard to talk about. So do take care of yourselves, get a drink of water, go to the bathroom, turn your camera off if you need. This will be recorded, so if you'd like to revisit it at a later time, that is absolutely fine. Back to you, Ezra.
And so here, this is just a very small sampling of some national resources, and we will obviously provide you with some more so that you have those moving forward and a whole bunch of information in a toolkit. But one that I definitely would like to point out here is the Trevor Project. It's one that is very important to me and is a really great national nonprofit that works on crisis intervention and suicide prevention, specifically geared towards LGBTQ plus youth. They have a ton of resources on their website. They even have a text line. It's a really great place to start if you are interested in supporting LGBTQ plus youth in some way, which it sounds like from the chat. And thank you all for chiming in on there. It's really appreciated that you all are in the right place and definitely want to do that. So I would highly recommend you go to their website and see what resources they have.
Awesome. So today we have a great agenda. We're going to tell you a little bit about the workshop that we co-created on healthy LGBTQ plus relationships. This is curriculum that you can use in your classrooms. It is free, and we're going to tell you all about the ways that you can use it. We're going to do a little bit of an intro on gender, sex, and sexual orientation. We could probably fill 3 hours with that. So we'll leave you a lot of slides to review on your own. We do want to just do some basic vocabulary and basic definition setting. We'll talk about some signs of healthy and unhealthy relationships from an LGBTQ plus lens. We'll talk a little bit about online dating and hookup culture, talk about microaggressions and stereotypes, and then we'll leave you with some tools around helping a friend or young person who might be in an abusive LGBTQ plus relationship. And we'll talk about LGBTQ plus inclusive pedagogy. All right. So Ezra, do you want to tell us a little bit about the workshop and why we decided to create it?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we've been working together for quite some time now, officially, I believe, starting in May of last year. And really, some of the statistics that you see here are part of the reason why we decided to really partner together to work on this workshop. And so just to read the first one there is that LGBTQ plus youth are twice as likely to experience relationship abuse as their non-LGBTQ plus peers. But really, one thing that I definitely want to make sure to mention is that we were very lucky to have conducted focus groups over the summer, and we met with actual youth in the state and talked to them about here's some of the content we're thinking about creating in this workshop. Does this make sense for you? What are we missing? What do you actually want to hear? And I cannot tell you how much information they gave us. They 100% shaped the format of this, and all the activities, gave us so much great feedback. And so really a lot of this workshop was based around what youth in Maryland actually wanted to hear. And I think that's one of the most important things that, to me, this is a workshop that's not just, somebody who's not a youth anymore, unfortunately. I have certain things that I think should be talked about, but this actually came from youth's voices, what they actually want to hear, what they're concerned about. And that's what I think is what makes this super special.
Absolutely. So the workshop is really designed for you to be able to pick and choose. You can take one activity and show it in a health class. You can break this down into a couple of weeks. It's really for you to say, this is something that my students need to know. Let me find this activity. Let me see some of these teaching points and apply it how I see fit. So we have kind of undergirding the whole thing, the signs of healthy and unhealthy relationships from an LGBTQ plus lens. We know that people experience abuse through similar patterns, but depending on our identities, we might experience those patterns in different nuanced ways. So it's really important when we're talking about abuse to talk about it in a way that does resonate with folks who are LGBTQ plus. Young people wanted to know, how do you define a relationship when you've never seen a relationship like yours before? What do you say? How do you ask someone on a date? How do you not be awkward when you're trying to set boundaries with someone? Folks wanted to hear about self-love and how self-love and a healthy self-relationship can impact a healthy interpersonal relationship. Online dating and hookup culture is incredibly important. Microaggressions and stereotypes, boundaries and consent, safety and breakup planning, particularly from the family angle. We may need to break up with or have a safety plan for unaccepting family members. And that's a skill we need to learn right alongside romantic breakups. And then also, what are some of the nuances of helping someone who is in an abusive relationship who is LGBTQ plus?
And just this kind of adds on a little bit to why we're doing this workshop and why it's important. Just a quick statistic that's quite a bit depressing. 1 in 2 trans and non-binary people, over 1 in 3 women, and nearly 1 in 3 men in the United States have experienced some form of intimate partner violence during their lifetime. And so And another thing I'd like to note about this statistic is that this is not something that is heavily researched, especially when we're talking about LGBTQ plus folks. Um, Really, this statistic right here is one of the only that we have about specifically trans and non-binary people's experiences with IPV. And so all of this to say is that this data is limited, which also makes it even more important to talk about it, to make sure that we're focusing on it, and making sure to create that space so that LGBTQ plus young folks can feel comfortable, sharing some of these experiences that they've had, and also figure out ways in which they can, support themselves, take care of themselves, and hopefully not get into a relationship that's unhealthy in their future.
Absolutely. So to do this well, to talk about anything LGBTQ plus related, but particularly relationships well, we do need to have a basic understanding of gender, sex, sexual orientation, and the vocabulary surrounding those things. So again, we could talk about this forever, but we want to do a quick overview, and we'll then give you plenty of resources to continue that learning on your own. So this is my friend, the gender unicorn. The gender unicorn is a really helpful tool for thinking about the differences between some of these different things. So we see the gender unicorn is thinking about a rainbow. That is their gender identity. It's personal to them. It's private to them until they choose to share it. And then the green, we see their gender expression. So that is external. It's how they're showing themselves to the world, maybe how they dress, how they present themselves. Then we see the sex assigned at birth. We see it kind of in the genital region there. We'll talk a little bit about what sex assigned at birth means, but it really has to do with kind of some physical elements. And then in the heart, we see two different types of attraction. We see physical attraction and we see emotional attraction. Those, contrary to popular belief, can actually be different. Every single one of these categories is a spectrum. None of these categories have like one or two or three or four fixed identities. They're all spectrums. We can all land all along those spectrums. Over to you, Ezra.
All right. And just a note, don't feel, if this is new to you, don't feel like you have to memorize this or anything like that. That's why we record these and provide the slides for you later so you can review. And also, of course, you can always follow up with me via email if you have any questions on any of this. I'm sure Jamie would say the same. So when we talk about sex and our sex assigned at birth or our birth sex, that's typically something that a doctor will assign to you, which is why we use the phrasing assigned sex. And so oftentimes for the most of us, about 98 to 99% of people, we are born, doctor takes a look at our genitals in particular, and has already seen, via ultrasound, has looked at chromosomes and things of that nature and determine it's a boy or it's a girl, and mark that on your birth certificate. And so oftentimes it's the options that are usually there are female and male. And so for me, when I was born, I was assigned female at birth, is how I would say that in a sentence. But it's really important to note that those are not the only options, that there are about 1% to 2% of people that are born intersex. And there's a lot that we can talk about in there that we're not going to get into today, and about how oftentimes doctors will decide to quote unquote correct intersex babies and make them look either stereotypically female or male. Horrible thing. But the reason why we point that out as well is that sometimes we think of it as super rare. And while it is rare, that's about as common as it is to be born with red hair, to give you an idea of how common this actually is. So that's just a little bit about sex.
All right. And then we have gender. Oftentimes people see gender and sex as the same thing. As we all know, they're not. Our gender is personal to us. It's a lens through which we understand the world around us, relate to the world around us, identify ourselves. Our understandings and our lived experiences of our gender are influenced by our cultures. And again, gender identity is how we feel internally, and then we express our gender externally through gender expression. Gender and sex can be linked, or they might not be linked.
What is one thing that I really love about this kind of discourse is that there's always changes in language, and there's always something that changes. And so even in the past, being a trans person, which you see a little bit about being trans on this slide, since coming out, in 2013, language has changed, I mean, over a dozen times at this point. So I will say that even though this stuff is on here right now, it's one of those things that you should kind of update occasionally, even just once a year, if not more, because terms oftentimes change. We find better ways of how to describe ourselves. And so for me, as somebody who was assigned female at birth and does not have the gender identity of female anymore, that would mean the term trans or transgender applies for me. So it just means that my gender identity and the sex assigned at birth do not align with one another. That is simply what that word means. Whereas on the flip side, for example, to use Jamie as an example, Jamie was assigned female at birth and has a gender identity of female. And so because those align, the word cis or cisgender applies for her. You will see also some examples of genders that do not fit into the traditional male or female spectrum. Some examples there are non-binary as an umbrella term that encompasses a bunch of different gender identities. Genderqueer, you might have heard, gender fluid. There are really a bunch under there. And so to kind of visualize it, there's this big umbrella of trans or transgender. And then non-binary is actually a smaller umbrella underneath the bigger one. So there's a lot of terms that we could get into. If y'all have any questions about a specific term you might have heard, feel free to drop it in the chat. You can DM us directly too if you don't want to put it to everyone. But this is just to give you an idea of some of the terms that you will frequently hear.
Absolutely. And then we have sexual orientation. So orientation is about who we're attracted to or interested in. And there are many dimensions of that. It could be sexually, physically, emotionally, romantically, spiritually, and more. So sexual orientation is more about who we're sexually, physically attracted to, and romantic orientation is about who we're emotionally or romantically attracted to. So there could be someone who is bisexual. They may be sexually attracted to their own gender and other genders, but they may be homoromantic, for example. So they're only really romantically interested in someone who shares their gender identity. And I will leave these for you all to look at when you get this PowerPoint after this, but we did provide some definitions for terms if you need a refresher.
All right, so you probably heard us introduce ourselves and introduce our pronouns as well right after our names. And it's simply just one way of addressing somebody respectfully and honoring how they identify. And so you'll see some examples here. One thing I love to point out about they, them pronouns, because it's not something we oftentimes think about in terms of referring to one single person at a time, is that we actually do this all the time. You might not realize it. So for example, if I found a wallet on the street and decide to return it to a hotel desk nearby, I might say, if there's no identification in there, I might say, hi, I found this wallet. I don't know who they are, who owns this wallet or where they are. But in case they come back here and look for it, here it is. And that's just one example of, because I didn't know that person's gender or who it was, I use singular they. And so that's just one quick example of how we use they, them pronouns in this singular daily. And I will say practice makes perfect. You might notice I use they, them pronouns, and I still mess it up sometimes, even for myself. It's something where it's really important practice, and it's also important to quickly, correct yourself and just move on if you make a mistake. We all make mistakes, so if you, the example here, if you mess up pronouns, just quickly say, oh, I mean this, and then continue on with the sentence and make a continued effort to use the correct pronouns. That's great. It does not need to be a big thing where you like overly apologize and say like, oh my God, I knew better. I shouldn't have done this. You do not need to do that. Really, sometimes just quickly making sure to be intentional about correcting yourself and moving on is great.
Yeah, we don't want to make the person who we've misgendered feel more uncomfortable because we then make a big deal out of what we did. And if you're looking to practice conjugation for pronouns, you're looking to learn more about pronouns that might be a little bit less common, or if you want to refer a student somewhere, -18 is a website where you can actually practice, and I would highly recommend it. All right, so that was our lightning fast introduction to some LGBTQ plus competency stuff. Feel free to send us questions, but now I want to jump into the relationship piece. So One Love has identified these 10 signs of a healthy and an unhealthy relationship. We'll give you all a moment to just look at them. The healthy side has things like comfortable pace, equality, healthy conflict, my personal favorite. The unhealthy side has things like possessiveness, manipulation, volatility, belittling. And so we mentioned before that some of these signs show up a little bit differently or in unique or nuanced ways in LGBTQ plus relationships. I would love to hear from you all either in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute if you'd prefer. How might these signs show up differently? One example that I give is that if you are not able to talk about your relationship with your family, if they're not accepting, you're not able to be out, and then your partner is also kind of intentionally isolating you from family and friends, isolation might be even stronger. There's the isolation of being an LGBTQ plus person in the world, and then there's that isolation from that intimate partner. So that's one way isolation might look different. Would love to hear from you all some other examples. Wendy, go for it.
Well, with like similar to like an example, I guess, that you were sharing, maybe something like manipulation, where somebody might say nobody's gonna want to be with you or talk to you or be around you because of your choices, and therefore manipulate them into being in an abusive relationship. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wendy. That's something we heard multiple times in the focus groups we did, actually, where trans students were told by partners, because you're trans, no one else is going to care about you. You're unlovable, and so you better stay with me because I'm the only one who will accept you. And when you've actually been told that you're unlovable by society, by your parents, by whoever else, that's really believable. It's a really, really good point. Thank you, Wendy. Other thoughts from folks in the chat or out loud? Yeah, students seeming to struggle with healthy relationships in general. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It is really hard, particularly when there are not a lot of models. We base a lot of what we do on what we see, and we don't see a lot of healthy relationship models at all, particularly LGBTQ plus ones. Ezra, is there one that stands out to you with the work that you do with your clients?
Oh, there's so many. I think just because Wendy actually made me think of it, and so kind of similar to manipulation, but I also think of betrayal as well. Thinking about being in for me in a previous relationship where somebody outed me or told, other friends that I'm trans, even though I did not consent to that. I was not out at the time. And so that is, a huge part of betrayal, and is something that is sometimes done either maliciously, or sometimes people don't actually realize that that's not a good thing to do. And so that's a big thing that I think comes up as well. And I think that in our focus groups, they talked about that as well as experiences they've had in the past.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ezra, for sharing that. I'm sorry that happened. So what we want to do now is a quick activity that you could do with your students to have them identify which signs they see in a particular scenario. So I will do this one, and then I'll pass it to Ezra to do a second one. So I'll read the scenario and then would love to hear from you in the chat which of these unhealthy signs you see. You have a word bank on your bottom left. You're going to see probably multiple, so there's no wrong answer. Mo lives with their older sister, Bree, and they aren't yet ready to tell Bree that they're pansexual. When Mo is taking a nap, Bree looks through their phone and sees that Mo is talking to people of many different genders on Tinder. Bree wakes them up to confront them, demanding that they delete their Tinder and insisting that they're just going through a phase. Which signs do you all see in this scenario? And if you want to share, tell us why you see that. Which of these 10 signs do you think applies here? Guilting. Absolutely. Belittling, it's just a phase. Yes, that is a super belittling thing to say to someone. Totally invalidates who they are. Definitely guilting as well. Other things folks see? What about the phone piece? What about the going through the phone piece? Which sign might that be? Betrayal. Yes, exactly.
All
Got
three of
in a
those
row.
came in at the same time. It was
I love it.
amazing. Ding, ding, ding.
Yes, absolutely. So betrayal and belittling were what we saw, but I think absolutely there's some guilting. There's some isolation. A lot of LGBTQ plus folks rely on dating apps to have connections and community, especially in more rural areas. That could actually be taking away a really important community for Mo. All right, over to you, Ezra.
All right. Jay's parents are having a few of their college friends over for dinner. Throughout the evening, Jay's parents use his dead name and misgender him. And in case you don't know what dead name means, it could mean, for example, birth name. Essentially, for me, in this case, it would be if anyone uses a name that I've previously gone by that's other than Ezra, that would be considered a dead name because that's not my name. When Jay tries to correct them, his dad whispers, "Don't embarrass us in front of our friends." Which of these signs in that word bank apply to this and why? All right, I see a couple folks saying guilting and a couple said manipulation, 100%. Anyone care to tell me a little bit more about why you said those two? Trying to make Jay feel like it's his fault, not theirs. 100%. Yes, thank you for putting that in there. Yeah, somebody, when your parents say something like "Don't embarrass us in front of our friends," it's putting the blame on him rather than them. They're the ones that are uncomfortable about it, and so Jay has to suffer in this situation. And I see Jamie chimed in saying that they could be deflecting responsibility too. Yes, 100%. Thank you for adding that. I can't remember what we put for this one. Yep. All right. Guilting and betrayal. You got it.
We had put betrayal too because it was a betrayal of Jay's trust to use his dead name to misgender him when he had trusted his parents to share his identity with them. We're going to skip that one just for the sake of time. All right, so we're not going to spend too much time on this, but wanted to bring up online dating and hookup culture because it is a really, really important topic that folks do want to know about. So Tinder did a survey and they found that 80% of LGBTQ plus people believe dating apps have benefited the community in a positive way. So really important to think about when we're talking about dating apps. It's very easy to condemn them or demonize them, but they actually can have a lot of value for people. I would say, like any technologies are not kind of value positive, value negative. It's really how we use them and how we kind of take that tool and then act. So it could be a really positive thing. It could also be a really harmful place. And that's why it's so important to talk about these healthy behaviors. So LGBT adults are roughly twice as likely to those who are straight to say that they've ever used a dating platform. So 55% of LGBT adults have used a dating platform. Why do you think that is? Would love to hear some thoughts in the chat or out loud. What are some things about dating apps that make LGBT folks more likely to use them?
I was thinking, if this is Allison talking, I was thinking it may be less intimidating than, going up and approaching people. I mean, pandemic aside, of course, but just less confrontational, less opportunity for face-to-face rejection, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. I had a colleague the other day who I was talking to say, I don't understand, I'm gonna sneeze. I don't understand why anyone in college would ever use a dating app when they can just go to parties. And I said, well, as a young queer college student, I was afraid to approach people. I didn't want to be, seen as creepy or rejected or, to try to assume someone's gender identity or try to assume someone's sexual orientation if they didn't want to share that with me. So that's one reason for sure. And I think it also goes to your point to volatility as well. It can actually be really dangerous to meet someone and have to say, I'm trans or I'm HIV positive or something like that. There is a real physical danger in that situation sometimes. And so to be able to share that behind a screen first and kind of see how that person responds is really valuable.
Yeah, I definitely think that too. Yeah.
I'm actually experiencing that right now. I'm on a couple dating sites, and I identify as a trans man, and it's so much easier putting the trans flag and letting people know, because the fear of rejection takes over when you're meeting someone for the first time, and then figuring out how to come out. And I have to come out all the time anyway, and the last place I want to come out is on a date. So it makes it easier, at least for me personally. I feel like it does.
Thank you so much, Maddie. Appreciate that. And folks in the chat said it's a place where people don't know you, not in your community. Yes, absolutely. If you aren't out, so you can't physically meet people in fear of someone they know seeing them on a date. Yes, exactly. And comfortability as well. Those are all spot on. And sometimes you might live really far from the nearest other queer person, and dating apps can help bridge that gap a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say that's what I think of all the time. Because I grew up in a very rural part of Pennsylvania. My town literally had 300 people in it, and the thought of dating there, like everybody knew everyone. So that was definitely not something. If I was out at that time, I would have been on apps rather than trying in person. So I always think of that one first when we talk about this.
Awesome. So we want to just give you the quickest little sample of this activity. This is an activity you can do for lots of things besides just LGBTQ plus relationship health. But want to just do a little test. Basically, it is a version of an in-person spectrum activity where you would stand on one side of a room if you felt one way, stand on the other side of the room if you felt the other way, and then stand all along the middle, depending on, maybe you lean that way, you lean this way, you're in the middle, you're not sure. So we've adapted that for Zoom. If you think the situation that you read is healthy, you're going to do your thumbs up reaction. If you're not sure or it depends, you're going to do that wow surprised face. And if you think it's unhealthy, you're going to do the clapping hands emoji. If you don't have these for whatever reason, you can also just write in the chat. All right, over to you, Ezra, to tell us about Monica and Shruti.
All right, Monica and Shruti met a couple of weeks ago on a dating app. They have been Snapchatting for a couple of days. Monica asks Shruti to send an explicit photo. Shruti is hesitant to send a photo as they have not met one another. Monica asks again the next day. Based on this very short scenario, are we feeling like this is healthy, unhealthy, or are you not sure? All right, I'm watching them come in and I'm seeing a round of applause of unhealthy so far. It's like 10 folks did that. Anyone care to share in the chat or unmute why they chose unhealthy?
It's Wendy. I can share my thoughts at least. Well, we saw like in the healthy and unhealthy list, one of them was even comfortable pace, and that's not necessarily a comfortable pace. I wouldn't think if you're trying to get to know somebody. And then the other part is just the asks again the next day, sort of that persistence of it.
Yes, 100%. And I love that you link that back to the 10 signs that you get a gold star. So that's definitely spot on. 100% agree with you. Thank you for unmuting and sharing that.
We can have time for one more. I'll let you do it too, Ezra.
All right, why not? This is my favorite one, favorite activity, the reactions one. I love using them. So Stephen and John have been talking on a dating app for a couple of hours. Stephen asks John to meet up that night to hang out. Again, very brief, and I'll explain why after you answer this. But based on this very brief amount of information, healthy, unhealthy, or not sure? Seeing the surprise faces coming in, not sure. Tell me what your unsureness is about. What more information do you think you would need to know for this scenario?
It's Allison. I guess I would need to know like more of what they talked about, what they shared. Was it, yeah, I mean, the intensity of the conversation,
Yeah, and and see, this is a part of the beauty of some of these. And sometimes people will be like, I don't know because there's no information here, and that's true. And that's because we really want to have people and youth in particular think about, what different scenarios would make this healthy and what different scenarios would make this super unhealthy, because we are missing a lot of information here. So it really does depend on the context, what the conversation was. All of that is super important. So that's why for some of these, really a lot of them, we keep it a little bit open so that we can have more of the conversation of, what do you think? What would change this answer for you? So thank you for pointing that out, Allison.
Yep.
Awesome. So that's a great activity that you can adapt in all sorts of different ways. We want to show you another quick one around microaggressions and stereotypes. One of the things that we really emphasize at One Love is that relationships are not just romantic. We have a relationship with every single person we know. I have a relationship with Ezra. I have a relationship with Brian. And all of those relationships can be healthier or less healthy. One of the things that happens in relationships all the time with LGBTQ plus people, all sorts of relationships, are microaggressions and stereotypes. And so thinking through how we can recognize them and redirect them is a really important relationship skill. So a microaggression, as we likely all know, is an individual act of subtle prejudice or hostility that can be either unintentional or on purpose. Microaggressions are these individual acts, but they're not insignificant just because they're called microaggressions. They can be super harmful, and they can actually really change the way someone feels about themselves or perceives themselves. Every single one of us commits microaggressions probably every day. We may not mean to, but we are doing it. And it's really, really important to be better about catching ourselves. And then a stereotype is a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing. It's a mouthful of a definition. I think oftentimes microaggressions are based on stereotypes, where we use the stereotypes that we have to then commit microaggressions. So they're distinct, but they're linked together. So I will pass it over to you, Ezra, to tell us a little bit about this tool and break down this particular microaggression for us.
All right, so here for this activity, we oftentimes create a table, and sometimes we'll give it an example, just so people know how this kind of works before picking a microaggression or stereotype to go through. So for this example here, you'll see an example of a microaggression. It says, oh, wow, you don't even look transgender, or, oh, you look passing. And the idea of passing means that I can't tell, for me as a transmasculine person, you can't tell that I was assigned female at birth. So I pass in a sense, so, I kind of blend into society. And so what's very tricky about this one is that it comes off as a compliment a lot of times. And that's how oftentimes people mean it. So a lot of times when I've heard this various times in the past, a lot of times people are very well intentioned when they say this and don't actually realize the harm that is underneath this. And so this is one that I personally like to break down because of how it can be seen as a compliment. So we then break it down not only by identifying, is it a microaggression or is it a stereotype? Then we talk about why and how is this harmful? And so you'll see here an example here. It says, while this may seem like a compliment, it's not the case. It's a harmful misconception that all trans people are somehow visibly trans. So you can see You could just tell, you look at somebody and you're like, oh yeah, that's a trans person, which is just not true. Trans and gender non-conforming people do not have to fit into the binary. We do not have to pass or look a certain way to be valid and beautiful. And so we'll break it down there, and then we'll offer a redirective measure of what the truth actually is, or a possible response if you were to hear this, for example, in person. And so, again, all trans individuals are beautiful. These phrases automatically negate the experiences of trans or non-binary individuals who don't express themselves in the typical female, male, feminine, masculine binary. And it's important to value all bodies, genders, and experiences. And so there are many different microaggressions and stereotypes you can kind of break down here. I swear I learn a new one that I hadn't thought about in a while. Every time I ask youth, they'll be like, all right, share something. They're like, oh, how about this one? And then they just like explode like in the chat or unmute themselves. And it's like, wow, I haven't thought about that scenario in many years. So it's always fun to hear, while it's, not necessarily a positive topic, it's great to hear them identify it so quickly and work through those.
Absolutely. Yeah. So typically we'll ask them, come up with some, and then we'll actually go through this chart and we'll break down one of them. And so actually what I'll do is I'll take off my full screen, I'll go into the PowerPoint and I'll type, and they'll actually feed me what they want to see in each of the columns. So is it a microaggression or a stereotype? And then what's the real message behind it? What's it really saying? And why is that harmful? And then what would we say if we heard this, or what would we even tell ourselves? Sometimes redirecting a microaggression is internally redirecting it, and affirming to ourselves that what's been said is not true about us. All right, so I want to give you a couple of tools on how to help someone in an unhealthy relationship. And as you teach this skill more generally, it's really awesome to weave in some of this LGBTQ plus specific stuff. We're also going to help you access a ton more on this. We're going to give you this entire curriculum. Again, it's free. We're going to give you a full PowerPoint, full toolkit, all sorts of things. But I want to intro a little bit of this to you now. The first thing is just reminding the person that their identity is valid. Exactly like someone brought up earlier, a very common manipulation tactic is to have someone feel like their identity makes them not valid, or that their identity makes them worthy of being abused. Yay, Allison, so glad you want to use it. So reminding them, no, your identity is valid, who you are is okay and great. And there is never an excuse for someone to be abusive towards you. The situation, your identity, or their identity, never an excuse for abusive behavior. As we like to say in rhyming terms, there's no excuse for abuse. And then encouraging folks to seek out LGBTQ plus specific resources. As you all know, it's really, really challenging for someone to ask for help. And if we go and ask for help, and the first place we go turns us away because of our gender identity, we're likely not going to ask for help again. So it's incredibly important that when we're getting someone help, the first place we take them to, the first place we refer them to, is going to be LGBTQ plus affirming. And maybe that means calling up a place, or calling up a therapist, calling up a school counselor and saying, hey, I have a trans student that I'm going to refer to you. How are you going to handle that? Are you trained in this? Are you going to be affirming to them? Remember that law enforcement might actually escalate situations rather than de-escalate them. There are a lot of situations in which there's misarrest, where trans or non-binary person, particularly person of color, goes to law enforcement, says, hey, I'm experiencing abuse, and they are the ones who are arrested. That happens a lot. So just remembering, there are a lot of resources like the ones we shared at the beginning that can be potentially better options. Being a consistent support system, people are going to need many, many conversations in order to be able to leave an unhealthy situation. Or, a young person leaving an unhealthy or abusive family situation, that might happen over a matter of years. And so as you can, being that consistent support system, showing up for them over the long term, but also doing that in a way that works for you, seeking out help and support for yourself, whether it's mental health, whether it's asking someone to guide you through the process, having that support for you is important as well. All right. With our last couple minutes, we'd love to talk a little bit about some LGBTQ plus inclusive pedagogy practices. And again, you'll get this, so you'll be able to go much more in depth on your own. Over to you, Ezra.
All right. So some of these might sound like pretty simple things to do, and they are oftentimes pretty simple to implement in whatever you're doing now. But I will say that even though they are more simple, that they are, their importance cannot be understated. It's super important to have representation of a whole bunch of different people in the LGBTQ plus community. And for example, here, books, articles, and videos that you teach, historical events, throwing in some LGBTQ plus representation, and especially including people of color is super important. One on that aspect that I definitely want to give a shout out for is GLSEN, and that's spelled GLSEN. They are a K through 12 focused nonprofit. There is a Maryland chapter of them, but on their website, they have various LGBTQ plus inclusive curriculum resources that can help you do this if you're not exactly sure where to start. And they include a lot of various representation in the community. And so that is one place to start if you're wondering what types of things you can include and need to learn history yourself, because quite honestly, I wasn't taught about LGBTQ anything in history when I was in middle school or high school. So that was something I had to research as I became an adult. So if you need to start somewhere, I definitely recommend them as a resource. Using a wide range of pronouns, names when you create examples or scenarios. You might have noticed that we did that as well. We included people who used they, them pronouns. We included people who don't have what we would probably consider a typical or a Western sounding name. And so it's really important to really diversify the scenarios that you offer so that you're representing more people. And of course, adding signage, decoration, posters, while obviously it doesn't mean everything, and sometimes people use them even though they're not necessarily the world's best ally. It is super important to, have that signage so that even if you don't, necessarily talk to every single student or whatever it is, they at least have some signage so that that is pointing to them saying, okay, if I need to talk to this person, I could if I need to. And so it is super important to have that signage as well.
Yeah, even, me as an adult, I go into a lot of different schools for my work. And if I sit down with a counselor and they have a little rainbow pin, I'm like, wow, I can be myself. And that's just a nice feeling. So language, we mentioned pronouns. Really take the lead on introducing yourself with your pronouns. You can see Ezra and I have our pronouns in our names on Zoom. And if you don't know someone's pronouns, even if you just see them and you've not been introduced to them, use they, them pronouns. Really challenge yourself. Instead of assuming someone's gender, say, oh, the cashier today, they were so nice to me when I was checking out. Or, hey, I saw this person who was wearing the coolest jumpsuit and I really want to know where they got it from. Students will recognize and notice when you do that. Replace some gendered terms like wife, husband, lunch lady with more gender neutral terms. Just do some thinking about what terms you can replace in your everyday vocab. And then offer a full range of gender options on surveys and forums. Let folks see themselves in the list of gender identities that you give them.
And this is just really expanding upon what we just shared, but in order to create a space for students to be themselves, we want to give them options to share things such as pronouns, but also not forcing them to do so if they don't want to, or if they're not out to everybody yet. There are a wide range of reasons why people might not want to share their pronouns right now, might want to just go by what people default to. And so that's totally okay. But if you're able to provide that space, let people know why you're asking. It's not really common in our society to say our name and then our pronouns. It's something that has honestly taken me years to practice and feel comfortable doing that. It's not something that I just because I'm trans, I was comfortable doing that right away. I definitely wasn't. It felt weird. And I could tell when people didn't really know why I was saying that. And so it takes a lot of practice, but allowing yourself to practice that, explain why you're asking for that, and not forcing them to do it if they don't want to. And that also goes for, creating forms, or, there are different ways to do this based on where you are and what's available to you. But, getting perhaps ahead of time, if people go by, either a nickname or a different name than what is on their identity documents, capturing that information so that you have that. I know, like, it's very widely common for people with nicknames, but oftentimes I think places struggle when it's, for example, a trans or non-binary student, just wanting to go by a totally different name. But it's the same type of concept, right? And so providing that option for students to be able to, use whatever name and pronouns they'd like is super important. And of course, gently correcting students. Again, we all make mistakes. We don't need to necessarily chastise somebody for messing up pronouns. Now, if they're doing it, to intentionally harm somebody, perhaps a conversation should be had, still not necessarily chastising. But just gently correcting when colleagues or even yourself, if you mess up, use the wrong name or pronouns, it really is important to do and a great practice to have.
Absolutely. And then finally, make yourself a resource. Say explicitly, I am a person who you can come to talk to about these things. I am a person who cares about all sorts of folks, all sorts of relationships. Know where all gender bathrooms are, know resources, whether it comes to relationship abuse or just general LGBTQ plus resources, and continue to be learning and educating yourselves. Thank you for taking an hour to do this today. So now with our last minute or so, I just want to share again, this is all for you all. We've created these resources and we're really committed to them being free. And so you can find everything you need on the One Love Education Center. All you have to do is make an account, just put your email and your name, go to the LGBTQ plus section, and we have a full long discussion guide for all of these activities and more, including many we did not show you today. We've got a PowerPoint, we've got a toolkit on how to have inclusive conversations. We have a webinar much like this one, and we have printable resources, including hotlines and different places that folks can get in touch with. All right, and let me just see the question in the chat. Oh, thank you, Grace. Grace is on it. She has shared the Education Center link. You can copy it and go right there. And you can also email her or me or Ezra. We'll put our stuff in the chat to get some support and help as you implement this. Here is just a quick video. When you go on the One Love website, just scroll right down, you see the Education Center. You can click on it, or you can go up there and click Education Center. Just put your name and your email and create a new account. And then you'll see all sorts of different courses, and you'll find all of our stuff in the resource section. All right, so would love to open it up. If folks have any questions, you're welcome to. I also want to honor your time. We would absolutely love to hear your feedback on this. Want to know what you want from us in terms of further content and ways we can improve this. So if you go to joinonelove.org/feedback, you can go ahead and take our quick survey. We'll put our emails in the chat. Looks like I'm the last one to do it. And just want to thank you all so much for being here. I hope this is valuable, and please do follow up. We are here for you, and we want to help you all serve your students the best that you can.